Now, Thomas Berry, as we've just heard, was well versed in many religious philosophies, starting with the Christian tradition. He was initially immersed in the theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, which combines the insights of classical thought, particularly the method of Aristotle, with the experience of faith. Thomas Berry was also entranced by the writings of Dante, particularly in regard to Dante's unrequited attraction to the beauty of Beatrice and his consequent pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. Classical Chinese civilization, as we've heard, also intrigued Berry. He traveled to China in the 1940s and experienced firsthand the historical impact of Mao and of Marx on world civilization, a moment that signaled a shift of interpretive frame for defining the human condition. The historian Giambattista Vico provided Berry a layered way of reading text, history, and human emotion, a method that requires constant probing, a constant uncovering, a method that brings us from literal readings of texts, from literal readings of events, to the allegorical and cosmological meaning, which then leads us to the ethical, the appropriate ethical response, and ultimately to the personal. From the combination of these early studies, and I've already cited Aquinas, Confucius, Vico, Marx, Mao, and particularly from his early encounter with Confucianism, two enduring hallmarks of Berry's thought emerged. And if you can only remember two words from this morning, the two words that I leave you or present to you with are authenticity and affectivity. Affect, the reception of an impression upon the soul that becomes life-changing. He applied this twofold approach of authenticity and affectivity to a new field of study while in New York City in the 1960s, Hinduism and Buddhism. And just as Mao signaled a shift in the historical political landscape that endured for decades, so also in the 1960s we had a religious shift with the events of Vatican II. And immediately following the Second Vatican Council, which gave permission for Catholics to open themselves to the ideas of all religious faiths and all philosophies of the world, Thomas Berry, inspired by this moment and as an important player in this moment, wrote two books that help illuminate two traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism from a theological perspective. These two books, Religions of India and Buddhism, which have seen many reprintings, as Mary Evelyn mentioned, are still available through Columbia University Press. And just as Berry studied Latin to understand Thomas Aquinas, and studied Chinese to understand Confucius, Mencius, Lao Tzu, and others, Berry also undertook the study of Sanskrit at Columbia University for this new phase of inquiry. And he also consulted Theravada monks in the Bronx to gain an understanding of Pali. And one evening he took our whole class over to this storefront. Actually, it was a brownstone Buddhist center down at the lower level where we spent an evening with a group of Theravada monks and heard about the relationship between Sanskrit and Pali. Now, in his assembling process of putting together his toolkit to unearth the insights of Hinduism and Buddhism, in addition to his encounter with primary texts and a raft of secondary literature, Berry also employed the Jungian worldview of symbol and individuation when expressing the truths of these traditions. And although it may not be at first glance obvious as you read Buddhism and Religions of India, certainly his delivery of the deep meaning of these traditions drew from these psychological insights.